Alright guys, now we're on the midpoint formula, but we're on the coordinate plane now. So for this concept, they do give you A, B, C, D values. I don't like that. I'm going to rewrite this as x1, y1 for our first point, and x2, y2. So when you have 2 points on the coordinate plane, you're going to note the first point as x1, y1, and the second point as x2, y2. So when you use the formula, it's going to be a lot easier. So for the midpoint is going to be one of the A points in between these two. In between our 2 points, correct? So in order to find the midpoints, I'm going to give you this. And I don't know if you have enough space, but you will try to write this. So our x midpoint, the x value of our midpoint will go as xm for midpoint. It's going to be x1 plus x2 over 2. And our y value for our midpoint will be ym, so let's go comma, ym is equal to y1 plus y2 over 2. So when we find the midpoint on the coordinate plane, we will have to do pretty much the midpoint formula from before, but just twice. One for the x value, one for the y value, correct? You don't have to copy this, but I'm just showing you guys the relationship between this and this. It's pretty much the same formula. We're just doing it with the x's, then we're doing it with the y's. All right, and then for our distance formula. So for the distance formula on a coordinate plane, that's going to be the length between our 2 points. Again, I am going to relabel this as x1, y1 and x2, y2. The distance formula is going to be the square root of x1 minus x2 squared plus y1 minus y2 squared. So do note that this negative will always be there, this plus will always be there, that negative will always be there, right? So that negative will always be there, and then it might change if you have another negative, which would be 2 negatives and 2 positive. I think we'll see that on our second example. So that is the formula to find the distance between 2 points on a coordinate plane. Let's go ahead and let's try an example. All right, so we're going to start off with the distance between A and B. So let's look at our graph. So let's label our point. A is going to be at 4, 6. Yes. So A is going to be at 4, 6. And for this problem, I will label this one as x1, y1. And then for our B value, that's going to be at negative 8, 4. And I'll label this one as x2, y2. Now, it doesn't matter which one you label as x1, y1, x2, y2, as long as you keep consistent. 1 with 1 and 2 with 2. All right, so let's go ahead and let's start up our distance formula. We're going to start with the square root of x1 minus x2 squared plus y1 minus y2 squared. All right, now we're going to slowly start plugging in the values. So I'll put in the frame. So there's your square root, our parentheses, that minus sign, squared plus minus sign 2. Right, that's the frame. We're going to use this every time. Again, note that this negative will always start off there initially, and then that might change later on. All right, so looking at x1. x1 right here, we've labeled right here as 4. So my x1 will be at 4. Okay, x2 right here, we labeled right here as negative 8. negative 8. And because it is a negative, I will write it with parentheses. Now our y1 will be 6, and our y2 will be 4. So let's go 6 minus 4. Alright, so the first step is just setting it up, plugging in the correct numbers in the correct spots, and being careful with our negatives. So now we can start simplifying. I do see two negative signs right here. Right here. Right? So with those two negative signs, that will turn to a positive. So this is 4 plus 8. This is going to be the square root of 4 plus 8 is 12 squared. Plus 6 minus 4 is 2 squared. Alright, so far not too bad. We are going to simplify a little bit more with the squares. 12 is 144. 2 is 4. And that gives us 148. The square root of 148. And this here is a pretty good answer, but you guys are mathematicians and we did practice simplifying radicals like on the first week of school. So we're going to go maybe onto the back side if you have space. Somewhere where you can do some side work. So the square root of 148, we're going to break it apart into 2 and 74. And 74 breaks into 2 and 37. All right, we did this on the first week or second week of school. So this becomes the square root of 2 times 2 times 37, which is 2 radical 37. So the square root of 144 is going to be 2 radical 37. Give you guys a perfect box. Wow, look at that. Skills. Alright, so the distance between A and B is going to be 2 radical 37. That is the length between A and B. Now let's find the midpoints between A and B. So the midpoint between A and B, we're going to use the midpoint formula, which is going to give us two values, right? We need to find the x value of the midpoint and then the y value of the midpoint. So I'm going to write it right here. Let's go very small. So xm, the x value of the midpoint is x1 plus x2 over 2. Ym, which is the y value of the midpoint, will be y1 plus y2 over 2. Now I can start plugging in my values. Let's go x1 or xm is equal to x1 is 4. 4 plus negative 8 over 2, which is negative 4 over 2, which is negative 2. And our y value of the midpoint is going to be y1, which is 6, plus 4 over 2, which is 10 over 2, which is 5. So the midpoint is going to be at negative 2, 5. Let's go ahead and let's graph that. Negative 2, 5. Hey, that looks pretty good. That looks like it's halfway between here and halfway between there. All right, so we got two more examples. I want to help you set up. Can you try to set up the next one with BC? And then I'm going to help you set it up, and I'll leave you to solve BC, and then you can do CA all by yourself. All right, so for the distance of BC, so now for BC, let's go ahead and let's label the C. So let's label the C. We already have B labeled, so we're going to ignore what we did over here. We're going to ignore this, and we're just going to look at C. C is going to be at negative 3, 8, negative 8. And then this one, since B is already x2, y2, this one can be x1, y1. Right, because we're completely ignoring A. A is not involved in this. We're just looking at B and C. So if this one's 2, this one's going to be 1. So that's your values for x1, y1, and x2, y2. Let's start throwing it into the formula. I guess let's start by rewriting the formula. The distance formula between for BC will be the square root of x1 minus x2 squared plus y1 minus y2 squared. And I'll write down the frame so you don't get messed up. So parentheses squared plus parentheses squared, negative sign, negative sign. Again, emphasizing that negative sign will initially show up, and then it might change if you have two negative signs. All right, go ahead and start filling in the x1, x2, y1, and y2, and let's see what you get. All right, at this point, you should have labeled your x1, or you should have plugged in your x1, x2, and y1 and y2. Our x1 is going to be at -3. Our x2 will be at -8. Our y1 will be at -8, and our y2 will be at 4. So what do we do here with the two negative signs right here? That two negative signs would turn it into a big positive sign. So that is going to be -3 plus 8. And I will leave it to you to finish the rest and maybe simplify the radical if you can. All right, and then the last one that I'm going to set up for you guys is the midpoint of BC. So midpoint, we're going to use the midpoint formula. So rewriting that one more time. XM is equal to x1 plus x2 over 2. And ym is going to be equal to, out of space, y1 plus y2 over 2. All right, so let's see if you guys can set it up, and then I'll trust you guys can solve it. Our xm will be equal to, I'll set up the frame for you guys, ym. All right, go ahead and find what is the x1 and x2. And again, don't forget, we're only doing BC. Ignore the A part. We're only doing BC, right? Taking the x1, y1, and x2 and y2 from B and C. All right, go ahead and fill it in, please. What goes here? What goes here? What goes here? What goes here? All right, so that is going to give us, if you filled yours in already, x1 will be -3 plus -8. And on the y value, we will have -8 plus 4. All right, I will leave it to you to simplify and see where the midpoint is. So when you get your answer for the midpoint, it should be somewhere around here-ish, right? Somewhere in the middle of these two. So maybe like here-ish. That's how you kind of check your answer, just like an eye check. All right, finish up BC and then try CA on your own. Again, if you need help, ask a partner, ask your teacher or teachers. And once you're done, check your answer and work on some Excel. Good luck.